First of all, I have questions specifically for Mr. McLaughlin and for Anne O'Connor. Despite the aspiration that progressing disability services would be family-centred, it's not the case. The Parents Cork Advocacy Network contacted me after repeated failed attempts to meet with the Head of Disability Services for Cork and Kerry. Many of the family forums within CHO4 have yet to be established, so I'm wondering when will they be set up, and will management in CHO4 meet with the Parents Network? And then for the same for Anne and Mr. McLaughlin, of the 91 teams, how many at the moment are fully staffed? And then how many are 90% staffed, say? I'm wondering also, what is the clinical risk of not having fully staffed teams? And when will teams be fully staffed? And then for Mr. Reid, I'm wondering, of the 350 million allocated for waiting lists, how much of that was ring-fenced for disability? Because it was of concern that in the 54-page document, disability was just mentioned once. It's deeply worrying. Bernard O'Regan talked about the legal requirement on assessment of needs, but nothing else, and the need to strengthen legislation to ensure the HSE can provide better services. And Malcolm McLaughlin said he's uncomfortable with the lack of funding. I think we all have to agree with that. But I can't imagine how hurtful and frustrating it is for families and organisations watching this today. We all know that the Department's own capacity review said that there was 350 million needed to meet the unmet needs of people with disabilities in Ireland, and I think there was about 65 million allocated. And when we hear representatives from the HSE talking about the need for, stronger legislation around this, and basically do we need to be kind of legally pushed and forced by claims and different things into providing services that, like, as a country we can afford to provide, that really it is a disgrace that we don't. And so I suppose my final question is for Niall Muldoon, because I think one of the things that I always end up coming back to, we deal with issues around disability on this committee, and the Cahirlock and other members here as well are also on the Disability Matters Committee, and one of the things that we hear from individuals, from families, from organisations, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, the UN Special Rapporteur, all of these people, is the need to ratify the optional protocol and the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. And I think that language is so kind of clunky and it doesn't sound that exciting, but ultimately it could realise the rights of so many people to live an independent and free life and to have access to education and to the services that they need, the kind of services we're talking about today. And perhaps it looks like we are in a situation where there has to be that legal obligation on the state to provide those services, otherwise they just literally won't do it. So I just think, for the purposes of people watching and for the representatives here today and the public representatives, if the Ombudsman could elaborate a bit on the importance of the optional protocol on the UNCRPD. Maybe first to Anne O'Connor for just the specific numbers there around.
Yeah. So I think, Deputy, I'm actually going to ask Bernard, because in terms of the detail around the CHO, what I do know is CHO4 has been probably our most challenged area in terms of the number of assessments sought, the backlog, etc. I can't answer as to why somebody hasn't received a response from a head of disability, but I will ask Bernard in terms of any insights into CHO4.
And then the specific numbers,
Cork,
on fully staffed, of the 91 teams, how many are fully staffed? Then, for example, how many are 90% staffed? What's the risk of not having them fully staffed, and when will they be fully staffed? The other question.
Okay, so again, before I hand over to Bernard, I would just say, in terms of teams, I can't imagine that many of them are fully staffed. The reality is, in our world, we're developing children's disability networks. We're also developing our enhanced community care networks, drawing on the same types of disciplines, and we are challenged in terms of filling, as I said earlier, the volume of recruitment that's going on to fill all of these posts. But I'll ask Bernard for a comment on that.
Thanks, Anne. None of the teams at the moment are fully staffed. We have an average vacancy rate of about 25% across teams. And I think all of the discussion that we've had earlier in terms of the steps that we're trying to take to improve that situation I suppose the rest of the answer, in terms of when that happens, Deputy, I can't say the point by which it happens. Other than that, we are working as hard as we can to build up the levels of staffing to make sure we're using the resources that we currently have available, and then in terms of our engagement with government to further develop those teams through additional funding over the coming years is the other part of what we're seeking to do. In terms of the CH04 engagement, I don't know, but I will follow up with the head of service there and come back to you. In general, our position is that we do seek to meet with groups wherever we can. So I don't know what reasons, logistical or otherwise, may be the issue. You asked the question as well in relation to the family forums. That is a priority for us this year, and we will be looking to establish those fora in the course of this year.
So just to clarify, not one of the 91 teams at the moment is fully staffed? None of them?
That's correct.
So my next question is for Mr. Reid.
Can I just make one other comment, if you don't mind, Deputy? Sorry.
In the interest of time, I probably don't have time for another comment on that, do I, to Mr. Reid?
I'm just anxious to let others in.
That's what I mean, yeah. So, sorry, there isn't enough time, but the next question was for Paul Reid in relation to the 350 million allocated for waiting lists. How much of that was ring-fenced for waiting lists and disability?
Yeah, just briefly come in on Bernard's point there as well. In terms of all them resourced, none of our community teams are resourced to the extent we define that they needed at this stage. That goes for our, as Anne had said, our enhanced community care teams, our older persons teams, our disability network teams. So we are in the process of, and got good funding from government again this year to support that, but that is a process we're still engaged on. Specifically on the waiting list, I don't have the full breakdown this year. What I can say is there's a 350
Mr. Reid,
million.
that question was for Anne specifically and for Mr. McLaughlin. The question I had for you was, of the 350 million allocated for waiting lists, how much was ring-fenced for disability?
Deputy, I was just started my sentence to address your question. There's 350 million in the Access to Care Fund as part of the National Service Plan for this year. 150 million of that is directed toward the National Treatment Purchase Fund, and just about 200 million is directed towards the HSE. Obviously, the vast majority of that is geared towards the complex, where the high numbers of our waiting lists are in terms of acutes, but over 10%, it'll be over 20 million, is focused on community. I don't have the full breakdown because each of the community teams are working with us now in terms of the allocation of that breakdown across the various community waiting lists that we have. So that's a process that we're still involved in right now, but it's over 20 million will go into community waiting lists.
So then for disability specifically, be somewhere under 20 million, you're not sure how much?
Yeah, that's not the total National Service Plan funding. That's directed funding for waiting lists. 20 million isn't total for the community teams, community waiting lists. And yes, disabilities will be an element of that.
So an element of the 20?
Up to 20 odd million, yeah.
Deputy Murnane O'Connor.
And that's separate. That's separate to Chair. Sorry, Chair. That's separate to the base level funding for the services in 2022. That's an enhanced investment.
Right. Well, sorry, Jennifer. One moment. I see we have another contributor. Is that Malcolm?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to Deputy Cairns' sort of points about particularly the family focus of our services. And I think, Deputy, you make a very important distinction there, that there is the importance of responsiveness to families. And there is no excuse for our services not responding to families in terms of their needs, other than, again, them being understaffed. And as Bernard has indicated, not a single one of our CDNTs are fully staffed. And as I said earlier, some of them are only staffed to around 50%. So there's a difference between the capacity to respond and what we have developed, which is family and person-centred services with the new reconfiguration of the CDNTs. And that's about the process of delivering both assessments and services and supports. So we are absolutely committed to that ethos, and indeed Ireland is quite progressive on a Europe-wide basis in pursuing that basis. But the distinction between doing that and being responsive to families when they have queries is something that we certainly need to address. You also asked about the clinical risk. Of course, there's very significant clinical risk where people are on waiting lists, one for assessment and then two for interventions, and has been emphasised already. People can miss milestones, they can develop secondary disabilities. So there's very significant clinical risk, and if it is the case that we are going to be required to do considerably more detailed assessments of people through the assessment of need process, then in my estimation, the clinical risk will increase, because we will have fewer people available to provide the services and supports that are needed to reduce that clinical risk. And just to say, in terms of the disability capacity review, it actually identified I think 1.1 billion that's required to meet our current level of demand. That's an additional 1.1 billion.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Muldoon, you were also asked a question.
Yeah, sorry,
by Deputy Kearns.
Your request was about the optional protocol for the UN CRPD. As you know, the UN CRC, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, has an optional protocol that Ireland signed up to in August in early 2014, September 2014, which allows for individual children to go forward to the UN committee and make a complaint about Ireland. The same should be in place for the UN CRPD, so that we can create an opportunity for those children to go forward. But at the moment, that's not in case, and it's something that's to our shame, again, as a government, that we haven't ratified that at this stage. We keep using the opportunity to say we're going to get everything right before we ratify these things. But as you can see here, it's an ongoing process to get everything right. It takes so long that we can't wait, so that opportunity is being lost every single time. I might just ask my colleague, Ciara McKenna-Keane, to follow through on this as well, because of her legal background.
Yeah, no, it was part of the programme for government, obviously in June 2020, that once the initial state party report was presented, which it was at the end of last year, that we would ratify the optional protocol. I know that in that state party report, the Minister stated that they're waiting for the decision support service to kind of bed down, I think, or to before ratifying it. But it just feels like the goalposts keep moving once we get to the next stage. So obviously, as an office, we'd be very supportive of all rights should be justiciable and should be actionable, and that's the point here. That children should have somewhere to go and say this needs to be done, and that would be the case for children under the UNCRC or children with disabilities under the CRPD.
That's great. Deputy Renee O'Connor.
Yeah, no, I just want to agree with Holly on that. That is so important that we have proper protocols, and all children have a right. And I think, it is a programme for government, and we do need to deliver on this. And I think also within